Maayad haal daw sa inyo. Maayad haal daw ta inyo alan, or should I say, good day everyone. This is Michael Orandibayo, and I'm going to discuss about the history of three eras and how it evolves and developed the communication. Before that, what is the word communication? But if you don't know, let's watch this video. Visual communication has been an integral part of a human interaction and expression since ancient times. By Brian Vernon, April 9, 2024. But before that, my objectives about this topic is number one, is to know how the history of communication developed. Number two, to examine what types of examples of each era. And lastly, to learn how important of this development of communication. Let's talk about the three eras of communication. Number one is the visual era, and number two is the wired era, and lastly is the wireless era. So we're gonna discuss about the first era of communication. The visual communication has been an integral part of a human interaction and expression since the ancient times. Visual communication is a storytelling. It's how we communicate information and create experiences across a range of visual mediums. And here's the example of visual era of communication. Number one example is the cave paintings. The authors of cave paintings, such as those found in Lascaux, France, remain anonymous as this artwork dates back tens of thousands of years. These symbols depicted animals, human activities, and are considered collective works of early human groups. Number two is the Venus figurines. Similarly, the creators of fertility figures like the Venus of Wellendorf, or circa 28,000 to 25,000 before Christ era, are unknown. The symbols carved from stone or bone likely had spiritual or ritual significance related to fertility. Number three is the Greek mythology and oral tradition. In Greece, myths and legends were passed down through oral tradition long before they were written. Visual symbols like the laurel wreath, representing a victory, and the Greek gods depicted on the pottery and sculptures, serves as focal points for storytellers. Number four is the cuneiform. Is one of the earliest known system of writing, developed by the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia around 3200 before Christ era. And lastly, the hieroglyphs first appeared around 3200 before Christ era in Egypt, roughly contemporaneous with development of cuneiform in Mesopotamia. Like cuneiform, early Egyptian hieroglyphs started as pictograms where individual symbols represented concrete objects, animals, or ideas. Since its start in the 1800s, wide network technology has made leaps and bounds in its development. Like wireless network communication, it continues to evolve and test the limits of speed as researchers discover faster way to transmit the data. And here's the example of wired era of communication. Number one is the telegraph. Developed in the early 19th century by inventors such as Samuel Morse, was the first form of long-distance electronic communication. Messages were transmitted as electrical signals over copper wires encoded in Morse code or the dots and dashes. Number two is the telephone, discovered on 1870s, invention by Alexander Graham Bell. Building on the principles of the telegraph, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876. Unlike the telegraph, which required messages to be encoded and decoded, the telephone allowed people to communicate by speaking directly into a device with sound converted into electrical signals that travel along wires. Number 3 is the expansion of wired communication infrastructure on late 19th to mid 20th century, or undersea cables. The expansion of wired communication wasn't limited to land. In 1858, the first transatlantic telegraph cable was laid between the United States and Europe, allowing the communication across the Atlantic. This was followed by the laying of undersea telephone cables in 20th century, such as the T-81 cable in 1956, which enabled voiced communication between continents. Number 4 is the Internet and the early wired networks. On 1960s and 1990s, ARPANET and the early Internet in the 1960s, the ARPANET project, funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, laid the foundation for the modern Internet. Initially, ARPANET connected computers to a series of wired networks using telephone lines, and over time, this evolved in a global network of interconnected computers. Number 5 is the transition to fiber optics on 90. And lastly, the transition to fiber optics on 1980s to 2000s. Advances in the fiber optic technology in the late 20th century, traditional copper, telephone, and telegraph wires began to replace by the fiber optics cables, which use light to transmit data at much higher speed. Fiber optic technology increased the bandwidth and reliability of wired communication, making it possible to send vast and amount of data over long distance. Wireless communication, or just wireless within the context allows, is the transfer of communication and information, or what we call telecommunication, between two or more points without the use of an electrical conductor, optical fiber, or other continuous guided medium for the transfer. And here's the example of wireless era of communication. The first is the invention of wireless telegraphy on 1890s. Guglielmo Marconi in the first wireless transmission. The wireless era began in the late 19th century with work of Guglielmo Marconi, who is credited with developing the first practical system of wireless telegraphy using the radio waves. In 1895, Marconi successfully transmitted signal over a distance of a few kilometers without using wires. Number 2 is the commercial radio. The 1920s saw the rise of radio broadcasting, the first mass communication medium to reach a wide audience wirelessly. In 1920, KDKA in Pittsburgh became the first commercial radio station to broadcast regularly scheduled programs. Number 3 is wireless video transmission. While early television experiments began in 1920s and 1930s, it wasn't until after World War II that television became a mass medium. By the 1950s, TV sets were common in households across the United States and Europe. Number 4 is the first mobile networks. The development of cellular networks in 1970s allowed for the creation of mobile phones, which could communicate wirelessly using a network of interconnected cell towers. In 1973, Martin Cooper of Motorola made the first mobile phones call, a landmark moment in wireless communication. Number 5 is the Wi-Fi. The development of Wi-Fi in the late 1990s enabled high-speed wireless internet access in homes, business, and public spaces. Wi-Fi uses radio waves to transmit internet signals over short distance, making it possible to connect to the internet without a physical cable. In summary, there are many types of communication which we can use today or even years. Because of those people who invented these examples is more thankful. Moreover, we can use communicate through visual, wired, and wireless examples. Because communication was obviously part of this. The question is whether or not they were intended to preserve memories, convey stories, or relay important survival information. And that ends my presentation about how it evolves and develops the communication. I hope this video will make a type of sharing knowledge that you can gain and apply in the future. And there's the quote. What is that we human beings ultimately depends on? We depend on our words. We are suspended in language. Our task is to communicate experience and ideas to others. By Nels Bohr. This is Michael Oranlibayaw. Thank you.